Distress signal arrived in 37 dead languages simultaneously. Humanity received it last because we were the only ones who hadn't already decided not to answer. 7 hours before our ships broke atmosphere, the Viari Collective transmitted a single encrypted packet to the Interspecies Emergency Council. Its contents were never published. What leaked was 3 words. Humans have responded. Every voting member went silent for 41 seconds. The Thalan Empire's representative was recorded checking the emergency evacuation status of their nearest embassy. That is how the galaxy learned we were coming. Not with fanfare, not with a declaration of heroism, with a threat assessment. This is the foundation of Screaming Stone. Welcome to Beyond Impossible Plus, the channel where humanity's most unreasonable moments become the universe's most important ones. I'm your host. If you're new here, we don't just tell you humans are extraordinary, we prove it. Story by story, crisis by crisis, impossible moment by impossible moment. Tonight's story. Foundation of Screaming Stone. The galaxy's greatest library, 10 million years of accumulated knowledge from a million civilizations, is sinking into planetary quicksand. The beings who built it are made of pure energy. It cannot touch their own creation. Every advanced military species ran the numbers and walked away. The cost was too permanent, the method too grotesque, the sacrifice too visceral, so humanity volunteered, tens of thousands of us. Soldiers, engineers, teachers, parents, all of them wading into the mud with riot shields and locked arms, letting themselves be buried alive, letting their spines become rebar and their skulls become cornerstones to hold up the weight of a civilization's memory for the next 300 years. This is not heroism with a clean ending. This is hardcore sacrifice, raw, brutal, and eternal. Stay with us through every crushing moment. The planet cradle of echoes had been stable for 10 million years. Then it wasn't. Cascading seismic failure ripped through the planetary crust in under 6 hours. Solid bedrock liquefied. Continental plates cracked like dry clay. And at the precise geographic center of the catastrophe, surrounded by 40 kilometers of churning, devouring quicksand, stood the eternal repository. Not just a library. The library. 140 spires, each taller than Earth's largest mountain range. Inside, the complete collected knowledge of 1 million civilizations across 300,000 years of recorded galactic history. Every discovery, every extinction warning, every peace treaty ever transmitted. If that building fell, the galaxy would lose its memory. Above it, the architects flickered. Beings of pure energy, the oldest conscious entities in the known galaxy, who had spent 50,000 years engineering this marvel. Incorporeal, untouchable, utterly unable to interact with the physical world their creation was drowning in. Their distress frequencies reached every civilized system within hours. The Viari Collective transmitted hymns. Crick's Confederacy deployed 1,700 metric tons of autonomous engineering equipment and watched every unit dissolve on contact with the superheated quicksand. Dracari Fleet entered the system, ran 3 hours of analysis, and broadcast their conclusion galaxy-wide. The structural mass is non-recoverable. We recommend archival documentation of the loss. The Thalan Empire's response was the galaxy's most damning moment. 7 words, transmitted cold. Knowledge is not worth a species' extinction. In the Thalan War College, this sentence is still quoted to justify every strategic retreat in the century since. One Thalan junior analyst, Rank Adjutant Sev Karath, was monitoring a secondary frequency. Something was answering the signal, something that didn't transmit tonnage estimates or theological comfort, something that said, "We're coming. How many do you need?" Sev Karath would not leave their monitoring station for the next 91 hours. Humanity received the distress call 6 minutes before every other species, because we were still running a Cold War-era deep space listening array that no one had decommissioned. Signal was received by Dr. Myra Osei, a 43-year-old astrophysicist in a basement monitoring station in Accra, drinking bad coffee and running routine maintenance scans. She read the translation twice, and she called the UN Emergency Science Liaison. Then she called her daughter to say she loved her. By the time official channels were debating protocol, 20,000 volunteers had already registered. That is the part the galaxy never modeled. They thought Earth would send soldiers. They thought Earth would send a fleet. Instead, Earth sent a registration form and had to shut it down after 4 hours because the servers couldn't handle the load. Final tally, 31,417 volunteers. Soldiers, yes, but also structural engineers, surgeons, a retired wrestling coach from Ankara, 19-year-old marine biologist who had never left the planet, a 67-year-old grandmother from Sao Paulo who submitted her form with the note, "I've had a full life. Let me make it matter." The architects received the volunteer list and experienced something their language had no word for. The closest translation in High Viari, sensation of a calculation producing an answer larger than the equation. On the tactical feeds, Sevkarath watched the human dropships break atmosphere and issued their first unofficial report. They know what they are volunteering for. Briefing documents contain explicit descriptions of compression fatalities and estimated conscious survival durations under load. The humans have a word for what they are doing. It does not translate. The closest approximation is, "Worth it. I do not understand this species. I cannot stop monitoring them." The architects transmitted the full engineering assessment the moment the first dropships landed. The Eternal Repository weighed 4.7 trillion metric tons. Its foundations were sinking at 0.3 meters per hour into liquefied silicate at 340 degrees Celsius. The only intervention that would work required a distributed load-bearing lattice installed beneath the existing foundation, meaning the lattice had to be constructed inside the quicksand itself, under active compression, as the building continued to sink. Lattice had to be human. Engineered materials dissolved. Alien biology couldn't tolerate the chemical composition of the quicksand. Human bone, specifically its density and structural flexibility under sustained compression, was the only material that wouldn't liquefy or shatter. Humans would lock arms in horizontal layers, shields interlocked overhead, and be driven downward by the building's weight until they formed a solid matrix. The CRIC's chief engineer objected formally. "This is not a rescue operation. This is deliberate mass burial. We cannot endorse this methodology." Colonel Aisha Rahman, commander of the human contingent, read the objection and replied in 4 words, "Noted. We're going in." What the CRICs didn't understand, what Sevkarath was furiously documenting for a report later classified by 4 galactic governments, was what happened in the human staging area before the first wave deployed. They laughed, not all of them, not constantly. But Sevkarath's audio feed captured a corporal from Lagos, 19 years old, first deployment, already wearing the breathing apparatus. He would die and turn to the soldier beside him and say, completely straight-faced, "On the bright side, no one's ever going to be buried under more important things than us." 14 people in earshot laughed, real laughter, the kind that comes from the chest. Sevkarath's report flagged this moment under a new incident category created on the spot. Humor deployed at statistically verified maximum existential threat. No known equivalent in xenobiological literature. Requesting behavioral analysis from all departments. No analysis arrived. No department had a framework. The first wave stepped into the quicksand 12 minutes later. The quicksand took them fast, waist deep in 40 seconds, chest deep in 2 minutes. The heat was catastrophic, suits rated to 380 degrees, but the psychological weight of feeling the mud press against the faceplate, hearing the material stress, knowing every centimeter of descent was permanent, that was not something any suit could protect against. They descended anyway, shields locked, arms fused. The first compression hit when the nearest section of the repository's foundation made contact with the top row, and the difference between simulation and reality is the sound. Sound of a human rib cage taking its first load-bearing stress is not something Sevkarath had been prepared for. They muted their audio feed, unmuted it 30 seconds later. They could not look away. Here is what the Thalan Empire could not model. Human beings experiencing extreme compressive forces do not go limp. They push back. Human sympathetic nervous system responds to existential compression with an adrenal cascade that temporarily triples grip strength, spikes pain tolerance by a factor of 6, and generates a survival imperative so powerful it overrides the higher brain's awareness of irreversibility. In short, humans being crushed to death will instinctively grip harder. The CRICs had not modeled for this. Their biological teams had calculated fracture cascades assuming passive response. Every projection was wrong by an order of magnitude. The lattice held. It held because 30,000 human bodies, being compressed under millions of tons of ancient stone, refused to stop pushing back even as they died. Architects broadcast real-time structural data to every monitoring station in the system. The repository had slowed its descent by 70%. That's when Sevkerath did something that would get them demoted, then quietly reinstated with a commendation, then demoted again when superiors realized what they'd actually done. They requested transfer to the surface observation post, not to document, not to report, to witness. These beings, Sevkerath transmitted, are not performing sacrifice, they are expressing it. There is a difference I do not have language for. I need to be closer. I am aware this is not standard protocol. I am filing this request anyway. The council approved it. 3 separate analysts noted they couldn't find a procedural reason to say no. None of them could explain the decision. All of them made it. 37 hours in, the second seismic wave hit. The planet wasn't just unstable, it was dying. The wave liquefied another 60 meters of substrate beneath the lattice and hit the human formation like a hammer hitting wet clay. 9,411 people in the upper lattice ceased to be people in under 4 seconds. Colonel Raman's comms filled with static and the sound of her own fractured pelvis grinding against itself. He had been compressed for 19 straight hours. Her lower spine was gone. Her legs were non-functional, held in place only by the lattice around her. She was conscious entirely because the same adrenaline architecture keeping her people pushing back refused to let her brain stop processing. Her command sergeant appeared on the feed for the last time. "Colonel, extraction window is..." Raman's voice came back flat and final. "There is no extraction. There is only the lattice. Get the next wave in." Nobody argued. 20,000 fresh volunteers were already wading into the mud before she finished the sentence. This is the moment the galaxy argues about most. The one the Thalan War College has analyzed in over 300 separate studies and still cannot model correctly. Raman knew the math. She knew she was condemning the reserve force to the same fate as the first. She knew she was condemning herself, already irretrievably pinned, already dying to a slower death without even the dignity of a final order. She made the call anyway, because somewhere in the deepest stratum of the lattice, 6,000 people were still alive and still holding. She had told them she wasn't leaving. She was not leaving, not 1 centimeter, not one person, not one name. Sevkerath's transmission to the council at this moment contained only 3 lines. Their commander has terminated her own extraction to remain with the dying. The new volunteers entered immediately. No orders required. I am requesting a new incident classification. Sacrifice is insufficient. I need a word that means the willingness to become permanent so that others remain temporary. Please advise. The council had no word. It would take them 80 years to create one. 347 years. That is how long it took. Generations of humans descended into the mud and became part of the foundation. Children grew up on Earth reading their grandparents' names in the surface plaques, then volunteered to join them. The lattice became a cathedral of compressed centuries. Bone, blood, and shield alloy fused into something no engineer had ever calculated, because no engineer had been asked to calculate human determination as a structural material. And the final tremor came. In the deepest stratum, Sergeant Elias Kane, great-grandson of one of the original Lagos volunteers, felt a tear through what remained of his nervous system. He had been part of the Foundation for 62 years, both legs gone, spine fused to the matrix, blind for a decade. He had been counting his own heartbeats as proof of continued existence for 4 years. When the tremor peaked, Elias locked what was left of his arms with the 2 women beside him, both clinically dead but still holding formation, and roared through a throat that hadn't made a full sound in 3 years. "Hold the line." The scream reached every active comm bead in the lattice. It hit the surface crews. The architects caught it and broadcast it on every open frequency in the known galaxy. The repository groaned. 300,000 years of accumulated stone swayed. Spiderweb fractures crawled up the oldest spires, and the Foundation answered. Every living body still conscious delivered everything they had left. Bones that should have turned to dust 2 centuries earlier held. The fused mass, meat and metal, and the irreducible refusal of human will absorbed the final seismic death throes without giving a single millimeter. The tremor passed. The eternal repository settled into perfect, permanent alignment. Silence fell across Cradle of Echoes for the first time in 3.5 centuries. The architects flared white and broadcast across every frequency simultaneously. Repository endures. Because humanity became its foundation. On the surface, Sevkerath, now 349 years old, having spent the entirety of the Foundation project as its permanent observer, having filed over 4,000 incident reports that collectively redefined how 17 species understood loyalty, pressed their palm flat against the stone. He had not gone home. They had been asked to leave 12 times, ordered to leave twice. They stayed. They learned the names. They attended the surface ceremonies. They stopped filing reports after Century 2 and kept only a personal record. Their superiors eventually stopped asking why. In the quiet after the final tremor, Sevkerath transmitted one last message. Not to the Council, not to the Empire, but on the open galactic frequency, unencrypted. I came here to document a species. I leave understanding that I witnessed something the galaxy has no instruments for. They did not save this library with genius or technology. They saved it by becoming permanent, by choosing to remain when every calculation said leave. I have spent 3 centuries trying to understand this. I believe now that it cannot be understood. It can only be witnessed. And it changes you. I am changed. I am grateful. Below the stone, in the darkness of a foundation that had finally permanently held, Sergeant Elias Kane exhaled for the last time. We held, from the Galactic Archive Incident Classification Registry, Year 412 Post-Foundation, Classification, Anthropic Constant Thalan Designation. Adopted galaxy-wide, Year 217. Definition: the measurable tendency of human beings to remain present physically, emotionally, and structurally beyond all calculated survival parameters, when the alternative is abandonment of an identified group or knowledge held to be of generational value. First documented application. Foundation of Screaming Stone, Cradle of Echoes, Year 1 Post-Foundation. Current applications: 1847 filed incidents across 34 species interactions. The classification is now mandatory in all interspecies emergency protocols as a non-modeled variable assumed present whenever human assets are involved. No. Posed by Rank Adjutant Sevkerath of the Thalan Empire, who spent 349 years as surface observer to the Foundation project without relief rotation. When asked why, Adjutant Sevkerath stated, "I could not leave. I had promised I would witness it to the end. The humans taught me that some promises are structural. You do not break them, you become them." Adjutant Sevkerath's testimony is preserved in Wing 7 of the Eternal Repository, the Hall of the Unreasonable. It is the most read document in the archive. 412 years after the first volunteers stepped into the mud, tourists press their palms against the repository's outer walls and feel the faint, irregular texture beneath the polish. Gulls, vertebrae, the compressed ghosts of riot shields in cross-section, the blood mortar darker than obsidian. The only inscription etched by the architects in every known language reads, "This knowledge rests upon the unbroken spines of humanity." On Earth, volunteers still register. The Foundation is healed. They know they are not needed. They come anyway. This is what humanity is. When the galaxy's greatest treasure faced annihilation, every advanced species ran the numbers. Energy beings couldn't touch matter. Ancient empires reviewed the cost and transmitted their apologies. The Dracari fleet documented the loss. The Thalan Empire wrote the sentence that became a monument to everything humanity is not. Knowledge is not worth a species' extinction. Humanity read that sentence and volunteered anyway. 31,000 people, wading into superheated quicksand, locking arms, letting the weight of 10 million years of accumulated civilization compress their bodies into structural permanence, making jokes about it on the way in. And when the final tremor came, 347 years later, when one man in the deepest dark, blind and broken, felt the last geological convulsion tear through the only thing left of him that still worked, he roared so loud it reached the surface. Hold the line. The cosmos had never calculated for that. It had never run a model that included a human being choosing, after 62 years of compression in total darkness, to hold harder. Thalan Empire spent 80 years trying to name what they witnessed. They finally called it the anthropic constant, the one variable that breaks every equation. We don't calculate the cost. We become the foundation. We are the screaming stone. We are the last variable the universe never learned to compute. If the image of a corporal from Lagos, 19 years old, about to descend into permanent compression, turning to the person beside him and making a quiet joke about legacy is sitting in your chest right now, Good, hold it there. That's the thing the galaxy couldn't model, not the sacrifice, the laughter before it. The specific, stubborn, utterly human refusal to meet the unthinkable with anything other than an outstretched hand and a quip. If Sevkarath's 349 years of quiet witness, a Thalan analyst who came to file reports and stayed until the stone was silent, carved something into you. That's beyond impossible, plus doing exactly what it exists to do. Not just humans being extraordinary, but the way we make others extraordinary by pulling them into our orbit. That bond is the most dangerous thing we export to the galaxy. Leave a comment with the moment that hit you hardest, then share this. The cosmos is old, vast, and indifferent, but it has never met all of us. Hit subscribe. Join the crew, because next time the galaxy discovers what happens when humanity is the only species that remembered to bring rope. We're beyond impossible plus. The universe is always listening. Make sure it hears something worth remembering.